Welcome, 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 and three more welcomes. Welcome, welcome, welcome to everybody across America and the world. Anybody watching this part of our continuing series where we talk to professors, reporters, academics, writers, activists, anybody who is on the left, anybody who's on the right and can speak intelligently. And we want to provide their opinions and insights, what they know, unedited and unaltered directly to you, the public, so that you could do this thing that was popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe it won't. With us today, it is our privilege to talk to not Sarah the person, but Sarah Gifford, the COO and co-founder of ActiVOTE. There she is. She started this group, and you can go to ActiVOTE to find out more about her. ActiVOTE aims to help you participate in our democracy. Our election overview shows you when you can vote, what races are on the ballot, and which candidates are running. Our policy questions help you find your place in the political matrix and compare you with your candidates so that you can vote for those who share your values. And our sharing functionality helps you interact with your community by posting virtual lawn signs, your matrix, or getting friends on ActiVOTE. Many users have told us they love our app, and that makes us happy. However, ultimately, what we really want our users to do is vote. So we asked ourselves the following question: Are ActiVOTE voting, and are users of ActiVOTE voting, and are they doing so in larger numbers than they could or they would otherwise? The short answer is yes, they are. The moment a voter downloads our app, it increases their chance of vote by 33%. That's very significant. Let's go to the next page. Give me 1 second. And here's a little bit about Sarah Gifford's. In recent years, more and more technology experts have been developing new tools to boosting civic engagement. Sarah Gifford embodies this trend. At the end of 2018, she set aside her budding tech career after a decade at supply chain software firm Quintic. She became Chief Operations Officer for Dispatch, which makes software connecting home service brands with contractors' clients, and co-founded ActiVOTE Incorporated. Its free app aims to increase political participation by giving voters access to information about candidates and elections, as well as encouraging their civic engagement. Her answers have been edited for clarity and length. What's the tweet length description of your organization? We're a safe, nonpartisan space for voters to learn about elections, the races, how to vote, which candidates believe, what they believe. An informed voter feels empowered, and an empowered voter shows up to vote. What was your very first civic engagement? My parents voted at our elementary school in rural Connecticut and would take my sisters and me to the polls with them. I remember not being allowed into my classroom until my parents voted. When I whined and complained, they would tell me there's nothing more important than voting and not to take school or democracy for granted. And this is the study where we found her at the Stanford University Strengthening Democracy Challenge, a study on how to improve polarization. But before we get into that, let's check in and see how well we did. Ms. Gifford, did I say anything wrong? Do I need to correct something? Did we get anything with your bio?
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, okay. So real quick, before we go into the study, why is ActiVOTE needed? And why did you think it was a good idea to create this organization?
So that's a great question. So as you said in the intro, I have a background in tech, and my two co-founders also have a background in tech. We've spent our careers building, enterprise software for big corporations. We knew we wanted to do something good. We knew that something good was going to be around depolarization, civics, and democracy. And when we looked at the space, we looked at everything that was out there. There's a lot of, tools around voter registration, and that's great. There's a lot of tools to track legislation in your state, and that's great. There are tools for a lot of things, but when we looked at all the reasons that people don't vote, they don't know when elections are. I know that might sound crazy when you think of November 2024. We all know that's coming. But do you know some people have elections on the Tuesday after Labor Day? Today is September 1st. There are people that have to vote in 4 days after Labor Day. A lot of them don't know. People aren't sure what they're voting for. Can everybody tell me what a county recorder does? Why they should care about the county recorder election? So what we saw was there was a big white space around voter education. It's very easy to say voters are apathetic. I think that's the common line for why voter participation in the U.S. is low. But we just said that's not good enough. I don't think people are apathetic. I think people care very much about this country. Voters and non-voters alike care desperately. If you give them more information, if you make it easier, we truly believe that will get more people voting. And as you said in the intro, our data proves that out. So what we saw was a white space around nonpartisan education. We're not knocking on your door to tell you the other side is evil. We're not knocking on your door to tell you that we are saints. What we're trying to do is give you the information, much like you said in your intro, and then let you decide for yourself.
So you really are not trying to be for the left or for the right. Your goal is to simply just get people who may potentially vote to make sure that they vote. And you're doing that providing basic information that should help them get to that. It's not partisan. You're not trying to push them to one group or the other. It's, hey, you should vote because you live in the country, and we want to provide services to make it easier, just like they have apps for everything else, ordering DoorDash or whatever. That's what I'm hearing. Is it's an app to make voting easier and more friendly, and it seems to work. 1/3 improvement. That's not shabby at all. That's pretty significant. Where did you know you would get that kind of reaction when you started this, or was it a pleasant surprise?
No, we did not know. Of course, you hope. But one of the things we do is we are trying to target voters who are infrequent voters, right? If you look at the stats, say to take the 2020 election, 150 million people voted. And that was pretty great for a US presidential election, right? That was a number that people are really excited about. Now, 50 million people didn't vote, but let's take that 150 million that voted for president in 2020. Over 50 million of them didn't vote in a primary. So they didn't help pick the primary. And those stats play out both for president, but also for Congress, but also for mayor, and also for city council, and for every other race. And so we are looking at those voters who do know how to vote. They cast a vote maybe once every 4 years, once every 2 years. How do you get them to primaries? How do you get them to locals? How do you get them voting more? We weren't sure if it was going to have that impact. But what we found in the data is if you get tools into those people's hands that just let them know when it is, but let them know in an easy way, in a non-fill up your mailbox with junk mail kind of way, they are actually likely to go out to vote, and we've seen that play out.
You seem like somebody who took this on as a labor of love, somebody who had to move from a good job to do this. American democracy is important. During the entire 4 years of Trump, all we heard about was, the death of American democracy. It finds me a little bit strange. Why didn't Bill Gates or the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or somebody with $1 billion say, hey, we need to get this app to help people to vote more? I mean, why was it you, a grassroots person, and basically all these other players never got around to doing this? Or am I missing something?
I think it's a couple things. If you take the political parties, they each have an agenda. They don't want higher participation. They want their voters to vote more. Right? As opposed to all voters to vote more. Whereas I want all voters to vote more. I don't care who you vote for. That's not my mission. That's not my goal. So I think that's one. I think the second thing, this is a hard space to work in. People are not kind when they talk about politics. If I forwarded you the emails that we got, some nice, some not so nice, calling us authoritarians, calling us communists, calling us, the list goes on. It's not an easy field to get into. It's not, and you're absolutely right. This is a labor of love, right? I'm not doing this to make money. In fact, we make no money, right? In fact, we pay for this out of our own pockets. The three founders fund this entirely ourselves. It is a labor of love. But there's a toxic world out there. Not everybody gives us kind words of affirmation about what we're trying to do. So if you look at why aren't some people in this game, I think it can be a hard game to be in. It takes some thick skin along the way.
Was it always that way? Do you remember a time when politics wasn't that way, or does it seem like it's gotten worse recently, last couple of years?
So I think these things are cyclical. So I think it's gotten worse since the 90s. I don't think it's gotten worse since the Civil War, right? If you look, the Civil War was certainly a much more toxic time than it is right now. But I would say if you rewind, there was a bit more civility in politics before 24/7 media, and everything on television all of the time. It's certainly not the worst it's ever been.
That's a good point. Did you notice a giant uptick the moment Trump took over of incivility in politics, or was it kind of still the background noise coming back from the 1990s? In your personal experience,
It's a good question. I think part of it is, I don't know if it got more, if it got less civil when Trump got elected. I think he was a different kind of not civil. I think that's the problem, right? I don't think if you look at quantity, I mean, politicians have been saying nasty things for years. I don't think we should fool ourselves that it's new. I think he said it more out in the open in a way that people weren't used to. And I'm not condoning it. I don't think,
of course not. Yeah.
Things to people, and I think saying nice things.
Yeah,
and
no one thinks that. Yes, of course not.
But I think it's unfair to just say that he is the cause of all polarization. I think we've been getting increasingly polarized. That's one of the reasons we were excited to participate in the Strengthening Democracy study, because we thought their premise of research was kind of really strong, at trying to start working towards that.
How did you get involved with the Stanford University Strengthening Democracy Challenge? How did that happen? Did they reach out to you? Did you reach out to them? Did somebody tell you about them?
So ActiVOTE is part of a coalition called the Listen First Coalition. And it's a group of organizations that work on depolarization, dialogue, and there's different approaches. So that's all different approaches to try to get people either talking to each other or understanding each other better. So this was published in that group, looking for ideas. And we thought it was a wonderful opportunity to test it out. We've been trying to do our voter education in a way that also depolarizes, because we very much, we try not to use the trigger words. We try not to use the catchphrases. We don't talk about open borders or kids in cages, right? We try to talk about right? Because both of those words are just, they don't, neither side actually agrees with either of those things. But
they both do it, I gotta say.
Well, they say it. I think that's the one thing. And so we try to kind of focus on this from a very, depolarizing kind of way. And so we thought it was a great opportunity, working with the academics on that team to truly test some of our theories.
Yeah. There's the Listen First Coalition. You can check them out at listenfirstproject.org. Listen First Coalition, 500 plus organizations bringing Americans together across divides to listen and understand each other and to find common ground and to make bridge building collaborative norms. So your organization was part of this organization, and the Listen First Coalition was talking about this idea.
Yeah, I believe Stanford reached out to them just to ask if any members wanted to, and we were not the only member to participate.
Yeah.
We did, but we submitted our intervention.
Yeah, and so everybody can go to you can literally just type in Stanford University Strengthening Democracy Challenge, and the website will come up. We've covered a couple of these other suggestions on how to improve polarization. We're trying to interview everybody if we can. We've also reached out to, I think it was Professor Willard at Stanford. These are ideas on how to reduce polarization, and there's many of them there, and a lot of them are good ideas, and they're relatively simple. So if you go to the website, strengtheningdemocracychallenge.org /winning-interventions, or just type it in on Google, you'll see little placards like this, exploring the nuanced partisan overlap between political parties, and it will explain it. Participants answer questions about views on 8 policies. After each policy question, they are shown the high overlap in the views of Democrats and Republicans. At the end, they are shown the average sizable overlap across other issues. Thus, they learn that the parties share a lot of views. I only looked at this first one with Puerto Rico, and it kind of talks about where people stand on Puerto Rico, and then it asks you to answer some questions on Puerto Rico, and then you pick where you stand on Puerto Rico, and then it goes, well, here's where everybody else stood. So now you can see there's some agreement between us on these, and we're not totally divided on issues. Am I summarizing this incorrectly? Is that roughly what this is?
Yeah, exactly. And I can put a link in the comments where you can do this directly in the app where everything updates live. But the idea was to take an issue, and we took 8 in this example. One of the things that Strengthening Democracy did in their study, which I thought was great, is all of these experiments had to be 8 minutes or shorter. And I think the idea of that is that's something that's scalable, right? If you want to get every American to do something that takes 5 hours, that's just never going to happen.
Right.
When you start thinking about getting people to do something that takes 8 minutes, oh, well, that suddenly sounds more doable, right? That the ask is lower. And so I thought that was one great aspect, to the research. But take a couple examples, right? So one of the questions we asked was around background checks, right? And we tried to pick some of the, hot button issues, and guns is certainly one, right? If you listen to the media, Democrats want to take your guns, Republicans want more guns, if I want to summarize it in 2 words. But actually, what our study showed is that's not true. Actually, 46% of Republicans also want background checks and a waiting period. Okay, 80% of Democrats want that, but that's a huge overlap in opinion. There's also 4%, of Democrats who are like, hey, we should not have background checks at all. Okay, 25% of Republicans, but there's still overlap in these answers. Same thing goes with voter suppression versus voter fraud. Right. So there's a big issue, especially kind of recently. Again, if you want to just summarize what the media said, Democrats want everyone to vote whether it's legal or not, and Republicans want to make it as hard as possible for everybody. Well, actually, when we asked this question and we said, what's more important, maybe the loss of a single vote or maybe one fraudulent vote, at the end of the day, 55% of Republicans, 43% of Democrats said they are completely equal. We need to make sure everyone can vote, and we need to make sure that there are, less fraudulent votes. That's a huge overlap on some of our biggest issues. And the idea here is not actually even that Democrats and Republicans agree on the answer. The idea is that if you look at any of the various positions, there are Democrats that think every single one of those answers, and there's Republicans that think all of those answers, right? So you will find, a Democrat who, absolutely wants to abolish background checks. And you're going to find a Republican who thinks, oh, yeah, we should have more of them. That makes us safer. So this kind of broad brush strokes that we get painted with our parties kind of really takes away the nuance. And the goal that we had for the study is if you showed this nuance that people have, that not every Democrat fits in one single box and not every Republican fits in one single box, if you show the nuance on those issues, that would start to depolarize people. That was kind of the essence of our study. And if you look at the data that came out of the study, the answer was, it did. One of the things that we learned from the study was that the way we presented the data in this graph could use some improvement. And so we're going to work on that and include that in the app, because the concept worked and the visualization needed work.
I can see just looking at the Puerto Rico one that you can see where Republicans were on the different options: all territories, full statehood like DC, no change, independent country. And then you're able to outline that there's a variety of opinions, but there's a huge overlap of a third in both parties for full statehood. And I'm not sure people. I would have assumed Republicans were dead set against that, majority of them. And so here's the stat saying that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of professors out there who say the elites are politically polarized, but the American people are not politically polarized. Because if we look at different survey data, a majority of the American public, want schools to be free of school shooting. They want women to have access to abortion. They want some form of health care. They want this or that. So there's a lot of research and professors saying, not everybody, but like 50, 60, maybe 70% of the population overall wants these things, and we're not able to get it done. And we're told it's because the parties can't agree. And they're saying, well, that's not exactly true because there's a clear majority. Why, if we have clear majorities or we have overlap in the parties, why are we not seeing more legislation actually get passed?
I'm certainly not an expert in Washington, but
your theory.
But yeah, but I think there's a couple factors, right? Money plays a big role, right? At the end of the day, political campaigns need to be funded. And while all candidates these days, and I love to see it, are going after grassroots donors, right? And this is both on the left and on the right, right? A lot of campaign funding comes from big money. I know it's surprising.
Really?
I know. I didn't know we were breaking news today, but there you go. But take as an example, right? Recent this week, right? the government announced 10 drugs that Medicare is going to negotiate prices on, right? 10 drugs. That general proposal that Medicare negotiate drug prices has broad bipartisan support, right? And there are Republicans on Medicare and there are Democrats on Medicare, and they both pay a lot for drugs, right? Look on the flip side. Big Pharma has spent $400 million since the infrastructure bill was passed, which made this into law, lobbying against this. $400 million. I don't have $400 million to give to my favorite campaign. Do you? So, at the end of the day, part of our goal for putting some of this data out there to show how much we agree on is to better also hold people accountable. We did a survey on minimum wage, right? So take that as an example. And we asked, hey, what should minimum wage be? So obviously there's the Democrats advocating for $15, right? It's currently at $7.25. There's some libertarians that don't want any federal minimum wage. Okay, that's also viable. But in between $7.25 and $15, we ask it like it's a yes or no, 15 or bust. Well, what about 10? What about 9? What about 11? What about 12? There's a lot of numbers in between there. And the survey that we did showed vast bipartisan support for about $10.50, right? Okay. So Democrats, maybe you're not happy because you didn't get 15. But Republicans, maybe some aren't happy because they want to keep it at 7.25. But oh my goodness, the American people are happy with 10. And do you know how many people that would help, Democrats and Republicans alike? So I think part of our goal in putting this information out there and making it more visible, and making it, I'm not trying to call anybody out, because I think they're all equally to blame, if you ask me, is to show, sometimes, if you can't get everything you want, isn't $10 better than $7? Given it has broad support. So that's a little bit of our goal with putting some of this data out there, is to, maybe it starts encouraging Washington to behave a little bit better.
Sounds like you're trying to encourage this concept called compromise used to exist.
I don't know about you, but if my husband and I are making plans for dinner, we compromise on where we're going each time we go out.
Right.
So we are well practiced in this, most of us.
Yeah, at our personal levels. Let me ask you, if I may, in comparison to the public, so there's this long-running debate in academia on the topic of political polarization, and it goes like this. The elites, the people in Congress, the donors, maybe the hardcore activists who support them, they're polarized. They have segregated themselves into two camps, where it's like all liberals and the Democrats and all conservatives and the Republicans, and you won't really see a Republican back a liberal thing, and you won't really see a Democrat back a conservative thing. Kind of the opposite picture, you're saying, from what you're finding on the study of the public. And the theory goes, the public's not really polarized, it's the elites. And that's why we can't get anything done, because there's no willingness for compromise, because there's no liberal Republic anymore, and there's no conservative Democrat. But when I'm talking to you, you're talking about actually talking to the people, and it does look like there are liberal conservatives and conservative Democrats, and it does look like there's overlap. Is there a difference between where the elites are and where the public is? Is it fair to say the elites are polarized and the public is not? I understand you haven't looked at this exactly, but in your rough opinion, from what you've seen.
So I think, one of the things we do in our app is you answer policy questions, much like you've seen in this challenge, and we take all of our users and we plot them on a matrix, on a two-dimensional grid that shows kind of where they stand on the political spectrum. And instead of just left, right, we make it a grid. We also plot politicians there, and we plot candidates there who are running to office to represent you, right, to help kind of see these things. If you look at that matrix, it is absolutely a bell curve with the most people in the middle, right? So there's a lot of conservative, Democrats and liberal Republicans. When you look at the data, there's incredibly nuanced views. So if you look at policy, yes, we are very much a centrist nation, right? If you look at the bulk of where America is, and we might be center left, center right, but we are very much a centrist nation. I think it's actually different. Instead of the elites versus the public, I think it's primary voters versus the public. So at the end of the day, what is happening right now is we elect someone in a primary, and then, that's it. So take my state. I happen to live in Massachusetts. We have had Governor Charlie Baker for the past number of years, a Republican governor of what people might think is a very blue state, right? But he's a popular Republican governor, here in Massachusetts, and he's not our first. Mitt Romney was also the governor, Republican governor, of Massachusetts. We actually have a history now, a moderate Republican governor. If you look at, we elected a new governor here in 2022, and Charlie Baker didn't run because he wasn't going to win a primary. So there was a very, very right gentleman running in the primary. And Charlie Baker knew that he couldn't win the Republican primary. Now, that gentleman who then won the Republican primary had no shot at winning the governorship in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is not super far right, again, very centrist. We now have our Democratic governor, Maura Healey. To be honest, I like Charlie Baker and I like Maura Healey, so I'm happy both ways. But it's the primary voter, right? The reason he didn't win is that he couldn't get through the primary. That's not what the state wanted. It's what primary voters wanted. So if you go back to why we're doing this, if we can get more people voting in primaries, I think you'll start seeing far more moderate people coming out of primaries on both sides of the aisle. For example, my home state happened to be a Republican example, but the absolute same thing I think would happen in Democratic primaries. And so I think there's an element of your question that's right, but I think it's primary voters versus the public as opposed to elites versus the public.
I'm not sure what the answer is, and I appreciate your perspective. I'm hearing a lot of different things. I never bought that the public's not polarized at all. I saw people turn on each other during the Trump era, and I saw people also turn on each other during the Obamacare debate, and I saw people turn on each other during the Iraq war debate. So I know they're maybe not all the time, but I've seen where everybody I knew, everybody in town, all my friends, all my family in California, in Virginia, in Texas were just as upset about the same thing. It's periodically these issues happen. I think generally the public isn't that wound up, but they can be. But it was just it's a long running debate. There's no clear answer. Some professors say, like Abramowitz, that it's the people. And then other professors like Morris Fiorina say it's the elites. And I like hearing a different perspective, that it's the primary voters.
I also think there's a difference between what the public thinks about government versus what the public thinks about politics. So I think if you look at what the public thinks about government and actual policy choices, right? If you truly ask somebody about, a background check, or you ask somebody about granting statehood to Puerto Rico, as you have on the screen, or all of these things, I think that is where we have so much more in common. And I don't think we are policy polarized. I think, to your point, we are absolutely politically polarized, right? If you look at that hatred that you start seeing, around, and it's absolutely there, right? There are families that don't speak to each other anymore, right? I'm sure you have your stories, and I have mine, but there are families that aren't talking. There are friends that are not talking. There are dating apps that are putting your political affiliation in there because you would never dream of going on a first date with someone from the other side. And I think but the politics part, right? Because if you look at some of the things people are getting angry about, it's not government, it's politics.
Right.
And I think, at the end of the day, those are two very different things. I'm not saying I'm right either, to your point about who is it and what is it. These are my theories.
Right.
My opinions.
And the reason that I'm asking, I'm having this interview series, is that I have not seen a clear consensus from anyone on this. Academia is themselves actively debating this, and they do not have an agreement. Half of them think it's the people. Well, I'd say 2/3 think it's the elites, and there's this third rebel band who thinks that it's the public. So they still have this debate. I've never heard somebody say, well, maybe it's just the primary voters, a subsection of that. I don't think they know. I don't think there is consensus. I think there's different ideas. I view this as the time before they knew cigarettes were bad. There were some people saying cigarettes are bad, and there was other scientists saying, no, they're fine. It's totally fine. And I view us there where we're trying to get to what is it? And I don't think anybody knows. If they did, I don't think I would have done 100 interviews trying to find it. So it's an interesting perspective, and it could be totally right. It's not the elites, it's not the public, it's a subsection of the public who's heavily involved in the primaries, moving us this way. I could see that. Okay, as we're winding down, how do we fix it? Do you have ideas on how do we get? Obviously, you're working with the app. Do we get the app in on everybody's smartphone, and that makes everyone in America realize that we have more in common, and they'll be less angry at each other? Maybe they won't, and they'll also realize that there's some policies we agree on. How could this help solve the problem overall?
So I think twofold. I mean, absolutely, we're on this passion mission because we think it's working. And so absolutely, I'd love our app on the phones of 200 million Americans, to help kind of get more information out there, to get more people voting in those primaries, and might change the landscape quite a bit. But I also don't think there's a silver bullet. So I think it takes, a million people doing a million different things. It takes someone like you hosting a debate in California. It takes someone like you starting a show like this. It takes someone like us making an app, right? I'd like to put that out there. But it takes someone like Unite America trying to change how we vote in primaries. It takes, someone like the other people who submitted to Strengthening Democracy. There was a great video in that challenge with Governor Cox and Governor Polis. Basically,
Yes.
we refuse to hate each other. It takes that, right? It takes governors standing up and saying, we refuse to hate each other. And so I think, the real answer, much like I'd like to think I'm going to change the world, is that it takes a million people doing a million different things. And I think if you're out there listening and you have an idea, I would encourage you to do it.
It takes a village, I think.
That's what they say.
I like that answer. That seems very realistic and based on reality. And yet there is a chance that one of the things I've noticed is I kind of see a dichotomy. Some people want to say it's the elites, it's social media, it's the cable news. And I sense this pattern of, as long as we don't say it's the people, then it's kind of an easy, quick fix, right? In theory, you could have legislation come up in 1 or 2 years where, we're going to regulate Facebook and Twitter, and we're going to change the primary and the redistricting process and get good politicians in. And then I see a smaller, again, minority of people, but smart people saying, it's the public and it's going to take generations to change, because there is no just passing a law and you get 300 million people to change their minds. It takes time and it's slow.
Yeah, absolutely. We covered a bunch of school board elections in Washington State this year. Washington State had some school board primaries in early August. I was just last week processing the results of those elections in, so we saw who won, who lost, who advances to the next stage. And I saw election, there were 3 people running, 2 people advanced. One person got 106 votes, one got 97, and one got 96. So that race, first place, right, that was decided by only a handful of votes. Right, between second and third, the person who isn't proceeding on lost by 1 vote. That is 1 person. And so, I think part of our mission too is kind of to empower people, this power of 1 vote, right? If you talk about the people, what can you do? Your vote does matter, right? We can argue all day about the Electoral College and the presidential election, but I want to talk about your school board election or your town ward election. Your vote really counts there, right? And there's somebody out there in Washington right now who didn't make the November election by a single vote. You could have changed that.
So you're not necessarily talking national, federal, but local elections. 1 vote can have a gigantic impact. And that's the one that's in your neighborhood. It's really going to have a strong impact on you. I've heard that. If you want to get involved in politics, don't shoot for the top. Go for school board. It has a big impact on your life, especially if you have kids and it's local.
Yep, absolutely.
That would make sense, because that kind of cuts off one of my last questions, which was, you have one party saying the election was rigged, but then you also had another party saying Trump didn't win the election because of a foreign government for 3 years, and that turned out to be not true, according to research that's come out in the last 6 months. So if you have both parties saying, I don't trust the election, I don't trust the election, I don't trust the results, that can't be good for encouraging people to vote, right?
No, absolutely. But I would also contest the premise. If you look at the 2020 election, I don't think we have a party that says it was rigged. I think we have a couple people that said it was rigged. Brad Raffensperger is a Republican, and he does not think Georgia was rigged. Brian Kemp is a Republican, and he does not think Georgia is rigged.
Sure.
The entire Michigan State Republican State Senate did an audit. They do not think Michigan was rigged. So I don't think it's a party. I think there's a few people who are making that claim. I think the party apparatus, Rusty Bowers in Arizona, the Republican Speaker of the House, said no, Arizona was not rigged.
Sure.
So I think that's, and maybe I'm being too Pollyanna, and we can see that later in the comments. But I think the reality is, if you look at, neither party said it was rigged. There were a few people in 2020 who lied about it.
Fair enough. And I've heard that. My rebuttal is all of the top Republican leadership, as I understand, that's in Congress now, basically backed the steal, or didn't attack it, or didn't refute it, even they knew it was wrong. They also walked back their condemnation of January 6th. I was talking to one professor, and he goes, well, that doesn't mean every Republican. I go, well, let's get this straight. If all the leadership in the House of the Republicans walk back the condemnation of January 6th, and they're still in office and not repudiated, that's basically the majority of the party saying we agree, or we're not willing to take them on, which I interpret as the party. And when I see this, the Stop the Steal, it's the same thing. Why is Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin, whatever his name, from California, still in power? They're saying radically crazy stuff. They should have been removed. That didn't happen. So I am seeing one party going, well, maybe not everyone in the party did, but it wasn't enough to get rid of the crazies. Crazy's still there. They still said crazy stuff. They're still saying crazy stuff. They weren't reputed. They weren't removed. That can't be a good sign, right?
No, it can't. I think we should not be normalizing this type of behavior, because I don't think that type of rhetoric represents the electorate. Now, how they keep getting elected, I'm going to go back to my answer. We just need more people voting, because I think if more people voted, you would see a change on both sides of the aisle.
What about, there's some professors who say the more active you get people in politics, the more you get them watching, the more you get them participating, the more likely they are to become polarized because they're so involved. There's some evidence of that. Is that not what you're seeing on your end?
I don't think so. I think the more active we get people, I think if suddenly tomorrow, in all of 2024, we had, 150 million people vote in the primary and 200 million people vote in the general, I think we would see much more centrist legislative bodies, and therefore we would see politicians who get rewarded on compromise. There are a lot of voters out there, and I'm one of them. I reward my politicians on reasonability and compromise. What can you actually get done that moves us forward? I'd rather move forward a mile than stand still, even if I'm really dreaming about a marathon. And so I think that if more people vote, you're going to see more centrist politicians. You're going to see more people rewarded on compromise, and then I think you're going to get less angry. Because I don't think compromise. How many people got really angry about the infrastructure bill? I know there's people who wished it hadn't passed, right? And some people who voted against it, but no one is out there screaming from the rooftop, I can't believe they're fixing my pothole.
Right.
Like, that's not happening. And that's a compromise bill. Same thing with the CHIPS Act, right? No one's screaming about the CHIPS Act, but let's go back to Donald Trump's presidency. He passed a justice reform bill that was a bipartisan justice reform bill. Nobody screamed about that either. I actually think that if we elect candidates who are willing to represent their constituents and understanding that their constituents are diverse, right? They don't have there's no district in America that has only extreme constituents. I actually think we would get less polarized.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Okay. Last two questions for you. You're not me. You're a third-party person watching this interview, and they're watching and they go, wow, I learned a lot. I've heard some interesting perspectives. It's really helped me embrace the debate, and I feel like I have a better understanding. but they're struggling to remember everything you said. But then they say, there's this one thing the COO of ActiVOTE said, and I just can't get it out of my head 5 days after watching the video. What is that one thought you want a person you'll never meet to not be able to stop thinking about 5 days after watching this video?
I will never miss another election. That's what I want them to think.
You rocketed that out. You had that ready.
You did not give me any warning, so that was the first thing I could think of.
You were prepped. Though. So, okay, last question. You don't have to answer, but we always ask, do you have any recommendations? Is there anybody you think might be willing to be part of an honest conversation? I hope you felt that this wasn't gotcha journalism. Do you have any recommendations? You don't have to say anything, but we always ask. We always try to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you haven't done so already, you should talk to someone from Braver Angels. I think John Wood Jr. is one of the leaders of there, and I think that would be a great episode for your series.
Done. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for coming out. I will email you shortly a copy of the video, and I want to say thank you for coming out. And if anybody else in ActiVOTE wants to do an interview, we are available. I like your organization. I thought you were awesome. We want to keep the door open for anything more. And I want to say thank you for coming out.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I'll email you shortly.
Bye-bye.